On May 11, 1975, two girls were discovered unconscious near a dry well in an abandoned house in Wayford Hill, displaying signs of drowning that left investigators puzzled. Unfortunately, one of the girls, Katie, was pronounced dead due to excessive water in the lungs. The doctors were able to save Misha, who was rendered speechless for the rest of her life after being traumatized by the incident. As years passed, she lived in solitude, haunted by that night. Years after her death, her sister found her diary, in which she wrote the details of the horrors that befell the two girls in her ancestral home. This is a summarized version of her story. It's taken me 20 years to even have the courage to write this down, as I am overwhelmed with anxiety from memories of our cursed ancestral house. My uncle had warned me against ever going there alone. Katie would have been here with us, and I wouldn't have to live with this guilt. My grandparents' house always sparked my curiosity as a kid. It stood silent and abandoned after they died, gathering dust and secrets. Not even my uncles dared to call it home. Why leave such a beautiful house empty? I often wondered. What's with the family's silent agreement to stay away? Ever since I can remember, my grandparents' massive, empty house has been shrouded in mystery, nestled among towering trees and a small forest. We were only allowed brief visits in broad daylight, always under the watchful eyes of our elders. As I grew, so did my curiosity, especially because my parents kept mum about why no one lived there or why it wasn't sold. With no response from them, I turned to my uncle for answers about the silent secrets of the house. His story, steeped in the supernatural, made me laugh. I was never one to believe in ghost stories, but that conversation set me off on an adventure filled with moments so intense, I'd carry them with me until I went to that house. As kids, we were always told to steer clear of a well on the property, a spot we assumed had been there forever. However, my uncle revealed a strange twist. The well hadn't always existed. It was merely a dark hole in the ground, expanding gradually on its own. This went largely unnoticed since it was located near a small forested area of the garden, where the terrain was rugged and less frequented. It began to form unexpectedly, which initially seemed like a natural phenomenon. Everyone grew to accept it, especially as it began to fill with fresh water, a welcome surprise. Yet, my grandfather remained uneasy, insisting that wells don't just appear out of nowhere. My grandfather linked the well's sudden appearance to eerie happenings in the area. He told us that after the well emerged, a bizarre wave of hysteria swept through the local women. The chilling tale began next door when, one morning, a woman was overtaken by a sudden madness. Tragically, she took the lives of her 3 sons. My uncle mentioned that back then, the area was bustling with life, not the quiet and deserted place it is today. The story sounded way too wild, so I tried looking for it in the newspapers and archives, but couldn't find the story mentioned anywhere. I figured they were just making up stories to keep us away from that locked-up house, or it was a disguise for their dispute over who would inherit the property. This only grew my curiosity, and I decided to visit the house without any adult supervision. Who doesn't love a good adventure, I thought. Plus, I couldn't shake off a strange magnetic pull I felt from the house. It is hard to explain, but it felt as if the house was calling me. There was no way I could visit it during daylight, so the next day, I planned to visit the house at night with my close friend Katie, who was just as adventurous and curious as me. She was eager to use her camera and make a documentary about the house. I lied to my parents and said I'd be staying at her place overnight. Katie and I wanted to spend the night there, explore the well, and have fun filming it together. I knew where the house key was always kept, a key that no one had ever stolen or taken without permission before. The following night, I headed to Katie's place. Once her parents were asleep, we sneaked out and took my car to head to my grandparents' house, buzzing with excitement. Little did we know this night would turn out to be the most terrifying night of our lives. When Katie and I started, it was 10 p.m. The house was uphill, so I had to park the car on the side of the main road and walk the rest of the way. I remembered that during visits, a quiet railway track was nearby, which only became noisy when a train passed by. The light seemed to fade as we approached the railway track, plunging us into a deeper darkness than the path we had left behind. Katie nervously chuckled and said, "It's oddly dark here." She admitted she was a bit more scared than she had expected. I agreed. The place had an unsettling silence and darkness to it. I had this weird sensation creeping over me too. But then again, this place has always had an odd vibe, even during broad daylight. Remembering all those grandpa stories that fueled our imaginations suddenly started to make sense. It was just our minds messing with us, I figured. After all, it was pitch dark and quiet, totally normal to feel a bit spooked. "Do trains ever pass on this track?" Katie asked. I told her I saw them pass by when we visited during my 6th grade year, and added that my uncle had mentioned that there had been quite a few accidents there. Katie and I were trying to dismiss the creeping unease we felt, engaging in lively chatter as we neared the house, only minutes away. In the midst of recounting an accident story that my uncle had told me, Katie's sudden gasp of shock and her swift turn to look away left me bewildered. Following her gaze, I was met with a sight: 2 young children, around 6 years old, playing with a ball in the desolate space beyond the train tracks. They looked at us and fixed their gaze, which was creepy. The kids didn't look homeless or like beggars. They were clean, well-dressed, and were playing with an expensive white tennis ball. "What on earth are they doing here?" I remember asking out loud, worried about the imminent danger of the tracks. I moved to approach the kids, intending to guide them away from the danger, but Katie grabbed my hand so tightly it sent a chill through me. She pleaded with me not to approach them and argued that an adult might be nearby. She didn't like how the kids were staring at us, and they were staring at us rather strangely. She insisted we continue to our destination, but they are just children, I said to her. I called out to the kids and told them to move away from the tracks as we reluctantly walked away. I looked back twice and found the children hadn't moved, and their gaze was unnervingly steady on us. But when the 3rd time I looked back, I froze. Instead of kids, there were 2 large dogs, one white and one black, their gaze fixed on us. Both of us were consumed by terror and couldn't make sense of it. We sprinted to Grandpa's house. We reached there quickly, panting and overwhelmed with a mix of fear and disbelief. I used the key, and with a swift turn, the door swung open without any resistance. Upon entering the dark, silent house and fumbling for the lights, the eerie incident with the children-turned-dogs lingered ominously in our minds. The dimly lit interior did little to comfort us, and the 6 locked rooms on the ground floor seemed to echo strange mysteries. "We should take a break," said Katie. I agreed, as we both needed a moment to collect ourselves and perhaps find the courage to face the other potential adventures the night had in store for us. Yet, even as I tried to infuse some excitement, the eerie sensation of being watched, of something unexplainable at play, clung to us, an unwelcome shadow over our attempts to move forward. The house looked lonely and scarier at night than I thought it would be. There was a huge oak tree in the middle of the lawn where we used to play back in the day, but seeing it at night was different. I realized the house was dark, not because of the weak lights, but because of the big shadow from the tree. The tree seemed still, almost like it was observing me. I reminded myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me in this spooky place. It was awkwardly silent. I could almost hear my heart beat. Suddenly, "Stop it, Misha! It's not funny!" Katie's voice broke the eerie silence that enveloped the house and its desolate surroundings. Her loud, shrieking tone took me by surprise. "Stop what?" I asked. "It's not funny. Stop talking to that tree," she replied, a statement that took me aback. "What are you talking about?" I said. "Please stop pretending." You spaced out and then began talking to that tree, greeting it and discussing some chair. "If you keep this up, I'm leaving right now," she warned. Confusion wrapped me like a thick fog as I tried to recall any moment of conversation with the tree. I quickly apologized to Katie, not wanting to end our house tour just yet. I was sure I hadn't talked to the tree. I had only been looking at it. Yet, a part of me questioned if I had indeed spoken to the tree without realizing it. Choosing to move past the unsettling moment, I suggested we head into the drawing room, a decision I regret deeply now. We should have just left the house at that moment. Unlocking the door with the key I had found, we entered a room that seemed untouched by time, its furniture dust-free and orderly, as if someone had been diligently caring for it despite the house's long period of disuse. This peculiar tidiness extended throughout the ground floor, raising questions about who could be looking after the house so meticulously. "Are you sure no one lives here?" Katie asked, finding it hard to believe that the house had been abandoned for years. I assured her that there was no one living there, even though I too started to doubt it. We explored the rest of the ground floor, finding the bedrooms and the dining room just as neat and orderly. Katie used her camera to film everything, and as we explored, the silence within the house grew increasingly oppressive. Something about the silence made me quiver. It was as silent as the jungle goes when a predator is in sight. It was in the last room, devoid of windows, that the silence felt most profound. This room, once belonging to my late aunt, carried a heavy atmosphere of loneliness and unease. Katie and I explored the ground floor, our curiosity piqued by the well-preserved state of the furniture and pictures adorning the walls. It was during this exploration that Katie's attention became fixated on a large photograph. I didn't notice it right away, but Katie's demeanor shifted. "Who is this?" she asked in a strangely calm voice. "She was my aunt," I said. I told her how my aunt had disappeared one day, and a few days later, we got the news that her body was found near the well. The topic of my aunt's death was a subject of discomfort within my family. So when she pressed me with more questions like, why did she disappear? Was she kidnapped or just went missing? I got angry at her. I asked her to stop it, but she kept pushing. "Why don't you talk about this? Shouldn't it be something discussed? Is your family always this secretive?" I felt she was being insensitive at this point, and it pissed me off. I finally snapped at her. I called her a zombie because she looked like one to me, standing there devoid of all emotions. "Just shoot whatever you need and let's head to the well," I said sharply. But Katie's gaze remained locked on the photo. "I am not the one who is a zombie," she said. Her face held a strange expression, and her eyes sparkled so brightly I could have sworn they turned red. Katie's comment seemed to me like she was referring to my earlier behavior talking to the tree, or so I thought. As I was thinking about that, suddenly she moved with an unusual confidence, showing no fear, almost as if she had changed in seconds after seeing my aunt's photo. Her actions were somehow intimidating. I briefly thought she was trying to scare me, maybe as payback for how I acted near the tree earlier. But then, it dawned on me that she wasn't trying to scare me after all. There was a genuine undercurrent of fear she was attempting to mask. I apologized for scaring her, and she returned my apology with a gentle smile. Her words, "Oh, I wasn't talking about you," lingered in my mind, adding layers of mystery. I asked her what she meant, and suddenly she screamed, "No!" Her voice echoed with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. There was undeniably something unsettling happening before me. Perhaps it was fear gripping her, I thought. Her eyes seemed to burn with a crimson fury. The air between us suddenly grew tense, charged with an unspoken dread. I was completely at a loss to make sense of things around me. Something was obviously changing, yet it was difficult to pinpoint. Katie, who now seemed like a stranger, had her features twisted into an expression I couldn't make sense of. I sensed the room growing darker, even though the lights remained on. I clearly remember hearing a whisper coming from one of the dark corners, and one of the shadows seemed to elongate. Before I could understand what was happening, Katie grabbed my hand. And in an instant, everything seemed different. "We should go to the famous well you've been talking about," she very casually remarked. I was shocked by how calm she was after what just happened in the room. "Did you not hear whispers and see that shadow getting longer?" I said. She acted dumb and countered me as if I was imagining things. "Don't let your fear get to you," she said. Her tone felt rude. She mocked me by asking if I was too scared to go to the well. Armed with torches, camera, and our bags, we navigated the wild, unkept garden surrounding the house, each step towards the well increasing our sense of dread. The darkness around us seemed to thicken as we approached our destination. I don't remember the well being so big, a thought I pushed aside in an attempt to not freak out. We aimed our torches down the well, trying to gauge its depth, and discovered it was immensely deep and absolutely dry. Katie's curiosity was piqued, her fear momentarily set aside by reckless courage. Despite my suggestion to document the well from a safe distance and retreat, she was adamant about descending into the unknown. Reluctantly, I followed her lead, another decision I would regret forever. We started going down the carved stairs, watching our steps with our torches. About 20 steps down, we discovered the underground passage was astonishingly spacious, far exceeding the bounds of what we had anticipated. The realization of how far we had ventured from the safety of the surface struck me with a wave of fear. I urged Katie that we should head back up, but the fascination that had taken hold of her was unhinged. Her eyes revealed a mix of fear and an inexplicable attraction to the depths we had uncovered. Right after I suggested leaving, the uneasy silence was shattered by the sound of women wailing. The noises came from multiple directions within the walls of the well. "What the hell is going on?" was the only thought running through my head. Katie, however, still seemed to be in a trance, and she smiled with her mouth open, as if she had been waiting for this. I grabbed Katie and shook her. "Katie, this is not funny," I shouted. As Katie lifted her head and I saw her face, she looked petrified. She looked around like someone took off her blindfold. She couldn't believe where we were. She shrieked and ran towards the steps. I ran after her, but the steps were gone. They were nowhere to be found. I felt disoriented because the sounds of the women wailing were growing closer. We ran in circles, looking for any possible escape, when suddenly one of the stones from the wall fell. We used our flashlight to see what it was, and when we saw the engravings on it, our jaws dropped. The engravings were an epitaph. It was a tombstone. We looked inside the space it had created in the wall and saw human skeletons. What was happening felt like a nightmare. Suddenly, some 20 meters from us, I saw a woman crouched up. She was sobbing when suddenly she turned to look at us. It's a face I have seen night after night in my nightmares. She was all bones with skin as gray as ash. It appeared slimy, and streaks of blood ran down from her hollow eyes. Her hair was long and appeared to stick to her skin. She got up and a groan formed in her throat. Her footsteps were slow and heavy, but suddenly she appeared before us in a split second. Before we could react, she placed her hand on Katie's face, covering it with blood. Katie let out a blood-curdling scream. I opened my mouth wide, but no sound came out. Katie turned to look at me, and her face had transformed into that woman's face. Her eyes were now hollow, with streams of blood flowing down her cheeks. Many stones started coming off the wall, revealing large holes. From inside, more ghastly pale women with blood oozing from their eyes crawled out. From some holes, resurrected corpses of children crawled out. The children's corpses were bruised and bloodied, their bones broken and contorted. They opened their hollow mouths wide open, and sounds of wailing filled the well with echoes. I started to choke when I recognized the children's faces. I remembered playing with them as a child when I came to visit my grandparents. I started to cry as they inched towards me. I was paralyzed. One of the women corpses caught my leg, and I screamed as she stood up and stretched her hand to grab my face. But I was surprised as she cupped my face with both her hands gently and brought her face close to mine. Unlike the others, she had blood streaming down her cheeks but mixed with tears. "Everything is going to be okay," she whispers to me. I then recognized her. She was my aunt. All of a sudden, I felt water on my feet, which appeared out of nowhere. It started rising, and with it, the sounds of wailing got louder. Steam started forming above the water as if those corpses were burning. I tried to reach Katie, who was screaming in pain, but the water started to rise faster. I couldn't keep up, and in no time we were underwater. I struggled as I started losing breath. Things slowly started fading, and everything went dark. When I woke up coughing beside the well, everything was hazy as I saw blurry faces and heard my name. When my vision cleared, I saw Katie's lifeless body lying beside me. When Misha and Katie were found unconscious near the well, Katie had been dead for hours. Doctors were only able to save Misha, but she had lost her voice. The trauma of what happened was too much for her to bear, and Misha withdrew herself both physically and emotionally. The case left both the authorities and the doctors perplexed because they found the well completely dry, as if it had been like that for years. And there was no water body nearby where the girls could have potentially drowned. Katie's camera and Misha's bag both were never found. Misha's uncle and family were never eager to investigate the cause of Katie's mysterious death, and the police suspected that they destroyed Katie's camera, the only evidence of what happened that night. Misha never spoke for the rest of her life, but wrote down her story a few years before she passed away. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.